Work relationships are really hard. You know, what's funny is I was preparing for this sermon, the last couple sermons I put stuff together and I've been like, let me give you some stats on the state of this kind of relationship. But you don't need to do that with coworker relationships because everyone knows that they're very difficult. Stanzi and I have been rewatching some of The Office recently. They have put out these things called the Office Superfan episodes. I mean, I'm really late to them now, so many of you probably know what I'm talking about, right? They're like many, many seasons into them, where it's like you get an Office episode, but instead of 25 minutes of terrible, cringy material, it's 35 minutes of cringy material. Just watching people do the most insane things. As I'm rewatching them, I'm going, if you are doing the EHR course, you suddenly understand, you're able to now name every little dynamic in those scenes and why they're going wrong. People not being able to listen to one another. Someone's feelings taking up the whole room. There's only room for one person's feelings. Right? It's just insane to watch. You actually go through and watch it. But why was that show so popular? I mean, it is gosh. Have you rewatched the first season of The Office recently? Those first 6 episodes are so awful. They are impossible to get through. They're so brutal. They're too much. They had to, rework the tone between seasons 1 and 2, because season 1 was too dark. It was too dark. It was too depressing. You know, all of those little elements of those episodes, though, part of the reason why they had such traction with people is because they're just pulled from things that we experience in real life, in our work relationships. The person who's just chronically unaware of how they're interacting with other people. The person who, the only reason that they're there is to, rise up the corporate ladder, and so they only care about what the boss thinks, making the boss happy, and they don't care if you lived or died. If you're not helping them, grow in the boss's eyes, right? All those sorts of things. You see them in that show, and you go, this is just real life. It's maybe exaggerated, but this is what our work relationships are really like. And of course, this is a real problem for a number of reasons. One reason is that you spend a huge amount of your time and life at your work. And so you go to your work and have miserable relationships with one another and miserable relational interactions. Not all of them. We have work friends and meaningful things, but just recycle these same miserable dynamics over and over again in our work relationships, and we're pouring 40, 50, 60 hours of our week into these relationships, into this relational space. And so the things that we learn in those spaces, the way that we relate in those spaces, the way that those relationships impact us in those spaces gets into us, and then we bring that home. And then we take that to our friends, and then we take that to our families. If we don't have relational health at our work, or don't have some idea of how to have better relationships at our work, the place that we're arguably spending the most time during the week is shaping us in a profoundly negative way, and then we're taking that and spilling that over into other areas of our life. How can we have better, healthier relationships in our workplace? This is the question we're going to be asking today. We're in the middle of a sermon series titled, Can't We All Just Get Along?, where we're seeking biblical wisdom for forming and keeping quality relationships. Over the last few weeks, we've looked at a number of different relational contexts. We've looked at relationships in community. We've looked at dating. We've looked at friendships. Today, we are looking at relationships with my coworkers and work relationships. I've titled today's sermon, Can't My Coworkers Just Get Along? Our text today is Daniel chapter 1, verses 8 to 20. If you have a Bible or device, I'd encourage you to open up to this scripture. Daniel is in the Old Testament and the prophets. I don't know, it's about 3/5 of the way through the Bible if you're just flipping to it. You want to look for the big prophetic names. Isaiah, keep going. Jeremiah, keep going. Ezekiel, keep going. Daniel, stop. Stop right there. Stop right at Daniel. Daniel chapter 1, verses 8 to 20. I'll read the text aloud. But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food, or with the wine that he drank. Therefore he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. And God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who assigned your food and your drink, for why should he see that you are in worse condition than the youths who are of your own age? So you would endanger my head with the king. Then Daniel said to the stewards, whom the chief of the eunuchs had assigned over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you, and deal with your servants according to what you see. So he listened to them in this matter and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food. So the steward took away their food and the wine that they were to drink and gave them vegetables. As for these 4 youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. At the end of the time, when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them before Nebuchadnezzar, and the king spoke with them, and among all of them none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they stood before the king, and in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were in his kingdom. We spend a huge amount of time at work, and work relationships have a huge impact on our lives, but work relationships are unique in that they have a particular dynamic to them, a particular dynamic governing our work relationships that are not present in other kinds of relationship. And this dynamic is the shared pursuit of some goal. Work relationships grow up out of people recognizing and coming together to pursue some shared goal, which that is not necessarily the case with a friendship. That's not necessarily the case with a romantic relationship. Friendships are maybe built around some shared spiritual dynamic that exists between 2 people. Romantic relationships are built around love. Familial relationships are built around belonging. But in a work relationship, people come together and are in relationship with one another because they have agreed prior to being in relationship with one another to pursue the same goal. There's a goal and a standard that is being pursued. And that goal and standard both creates the context for the relationship to exist in the first place, and it creates a number of different challenges. Because we all at different times live in different relationships to that goal and that standard. And depending on where we are in relationship to it, it can complicate our work relationships with one another. Sometimes we are in difficult situations with respect to the shared goal, with respect to myself and where I am and how I'm doing in my work environment, with respect to other people. And of course, our coworkers have their own fears and anxieties and challenges and difficulties ahead of them as they try to live in some sort of right relationship with that shared goal as well. And these dynamics complicate and make challenging our work relationships. These dynamics are on display in Daniel chapter 1. Daniel's setting here, it may be obscure to us at first, but Daniel's setting here is an ancient work environment. Daniel is in this context, ancient political employment. Daniel here is being trained to live and work in the courts of the Babylonian king. So in ancient context, and of course in different ways, these are paralleled in political work environments today, but in the ancient world, there was a political track of employment that you could be selected to be on, which basically was be trained to be an ancient politician, an ancient sort of ritual politician. Your expertise would sort of straddle like government affairs and the gods. And you would be trained in those things, and then you would be an advisor to the king, or a noble of some sort. And you would have some indelible political function that you were performing. And Daniel is being trained to do this in the court of the Babylonian king. Now, it's interesting that Daniel's being trained to do this because, of course, Daniel is not Babylonian. Daniel is Judahite. And so this puts Daniel in an even more interesting and precarious position. Daniel is in this situation because Nebuchadnezzar, the king who's named in this text, has just destroyed Jerusalem and exiled some of the best and most promising Judahites to Babylon. And he has decreed that they should be in the Babylonian political training pool. So Daniel and his buddies are promising young Judahites who've been thrust into what is already for them a culturally and politically hostile work environment because they're being groomed to be Babylonian politicians when they don't want to be there in the first place. A little bit of a forced employment situation going on here. So it's already a challenging political and employment situation for Daniel and his friends. And of course, the goal in the end of his training regimen and the environment that he's in is to serve the king in a way that leads to the king's winning and the king's victories and the king's flourishing, either through political maneuvering and advice or through some sort of divine and ritualistic advice that they could give the king in his court. And Daniel experiences an immediate difficulty that we see right away in this text. Daniel's work environment is pursuing this goal in a way that is harmful to Daniel personally. It's pursuing this goal in a way that doesn't work for him. One of the ways that they're pursuing this is by feeding these young politicians food from the king's table. It would have been seen in the ancient world as a huge boon to be given food from the king's table. You can imagine a situation of intense financial and social inequality where the majority of the resources are going to the king and his retinue. And so to be given food from the king's table would have been given food that is just the fat of the land. It's the best food and the most indulgent food that the Babylonians can offer. And they're giving this food to these young politicians because not only are they trying to have them be physically well and fit, but they're trying to steep them in a sense of privilege and high Babylonian culture. So it's very important, both in terms of their perceived sustenance and physical well-being, but also the culture that they are being trained into, that they are eating this food. And Daniel has an issue with this. Daniel sees the eating of this food as something that defiles him. There are a number of different reasons. Daniel may have thought this. Maybe he has religious reasons for it. Maybe he senses that the food comes with strings attached. Right? It's like the Babylonian culture or the service of Babylonian gods, and so he doesn't want to eat that food. Whatever it is, it kind of doesn't matter the reasoning for why Daniel determines that this particular element of his job doesn't work for him. The elements that we need to focus on is just that he does. He looks at this and goes, this doesn't work for me. And there may be faith-based reasons, there are cultural reasons, but this is an element that is seriously not working for me. Now, Daniel doesn't just choose anything, right? By this point, Daniel is so far along in this trajectory of employment that he's had to make a number of concessions along the way. For example, it's not listed in this passage, but Daniel has been given a Babylonian name. Daniel doesn't fight over being given a Babylonian name. But for some reason, when this thing comes up, he knows in his spirit, this doesn't work for me. I can't keep going on this particular trajectory if this thing is the cost that I have to pay in order to continue to do it. The challenge here is that the difficulty that Daniel is experiencing in his work environment is at precise odds with the way that the head eunuch is experiencing his work environment. The head eunuch is an interesting character. You may not recognize his importance at first. You're like, oh yeah, eunuchs, that weird thing that happened in the ancient world. Let's not talk about it. The head eunuch is, this is a sort of court position that would have been found in many different ancient cultures, whether it was called exactly this term or not. The head eunuch is someone who has a significant position of authority in the court of the king. In some ways, he might have reported only to the king. He holds a very authoritative and insider position, and that is why he's a eunuch. He was probably made a eunuch to fit this position. Because if you are the king and you're thinking, who can I have in my inner circle? Someone who has no sexual drive to compete with you sexually amongst concubines, or maybe you're going to compete and you're going to birth a child who could compete with the line of the king. Those are things that you would not want present in your inner circle. So at times, people who were being groomed for this particular position were made eunuchs so that they did not compete with the authority of the king in a particular way. So this is someone who actually has a very specific, very insider, very privileged position. And yet at the same time, he's in a very precarious position because he basically answers only to the king. And so if the king is unhappy, the head eunuch's position becomes unstable very, very quickly. So when Daniel shows up to the head eunuch and says, hey, I would like to stop eating this food, what does the head eunuch say? The head eunuch says, listen, I'm terrified of the king. And if you show up before the king and the king sees that I haven't been taking care of you in some way, that you look worse for everyone, I literally will probably just get my head cut off. They already cut off some other part of my body. They're not going to feel bad about chopping off my head. And so he's in a very dangerous and precarious position. And Daniel, this is what happens in work environments. Daniel's relationship to the elements of his job is something that he needs to take seriously and have integrity with himself and his own work. But that is immediately coming to cross purposes with the way his boss is experiencing his work. And his boss sits under a chain of fear of power, and so his boss reacts in a certain way to how Daniel is experiencing his work. And this is one of the main challenges that underlies so many of our work relationships. We are at cross purposes with people with whom we are ostensibly pursuing the same goal. We're supposed to be pursuing the same goal, we're supposed to be on the same team, and yet everyone has their little window into how to pursue that goal. Everyone has their little window into what it's going to mean for me to be successful. Everyone has a slightly different version of what success looks like, and as a result, we end up being at cross purposes with people with whom we're supposed to be on the same team. And this is where so much of our conflict in work relationships comes from. Sometimes we just have different ideas about how to pursue the same goal, and so we're bumping up against different personalities. Sometimes people are under different kinds of pressure in the same work environment, and we're maybe blind to the different kinds of pressure that people are under. Someone is really on thin ice with the boss. Someone has made a couple mistakes already. It's a toxic work environment, and so if you make one mistake, you might be out. And so we bump up against these other people who are in different places in relationship to different forces at their work. Sometimes we just work with difficult people. And so their personality is bumping up against us. They're maybe honestly not great at working at a team. They're not great at communicating with other people. All of these things can come together to put us at cross purposes with people with whom we're supposed to be on the same team. We're on the same team. Why are we fighting? Why are we at each other's throats? Why don't we like each other? These are the reasons why we end up being at cross purposes with people with whom we're supposed to be on the same team. And in this environment, like Daniel, we need a few things in order to be able to navigate these work relationships well. We need a few things in order to be able to show up to these relationships and inject not just sort of generally some niceness or something vaguely to kind of hope it gets better, but some specific things that help us navigate the particularities of worldly work environments. There are at least three things that we need and that we see in this text. The first thing that we need to do is we need to take seriously and hold with integrity my experience of my work environment. Some of us don't do this. Some of us, we get into a work environment and we're like, you know what? The only thing matters is that I get the stamp of approval from my boss. And so whatever I'm experiencing, it kind of doesn't matter. My feelings don't matter. My hurt doesn't matter. Just out the window. Out it goes. Doesn't matter because I'm working. And the only thing that matters is the work. But that's not what we see Daniel do. Not everything at our jobs can be the hill that we die on. But at some point in our work, at some point in your careers, at some point in your trajectories, at some point in your work environment right now, you're probably going to come up against something where you know in your spirit, this is something, I at least have to talk to somebody about this thing. I can't shove this down. I can't pretend like it's not hurting me. I can't pretend like it doesn't matter. I can't pretend like that person's conduct isn't poisoning the whole team. I can't fake this thing anymore. I have to treat my experience in the right moments with integrity. And that's what we see Daniel do. Verse 11 of chapter 1. Then Daniel said, similarly in verse 8, therefore he asked the chief of the eunuchs. Right? When Daniel came up against the thing where he said, you know what? This is a hill I have to die on. Like, I've been a team player in all these other ways that I don't really like, but here's the thing. I'm not going to defile myself by doing that thing. I'm not going to do it. When he identified that and experienced that, what did he do? He spoke up about it. Right? And as soon as the text says, and Daniel asked, or and Daniel said, what we're seeing there in those simple few words, in that small, simple action, is a person who is saying, I'm going to treat my own experience of this environment with integrity. I'm going to speak up about this. Right? We see all of that inner integrity is on display when Daniel, in a hostile foreign work environment, shows up and says, I've kept my mouth shut about a handful of things, but I can't do it about this thing. And so I'm going to speak up about it. And we have to be able to do that in our work environments. It's not easy to do this. It's very challenging. It's challenging to discern the right moments to do this. Not every hill can be the hill that we're going to die on. But we know in our spirits there are certain moments, certain challenges, certain times when we have to be able to stand up in our work environment and say, I care about the integrity of my own experience, and if I don't voice this thing, I'm just letting myself get run over, and I'm not going to do that here. We have to be able to do that in our work environments in order to navigate the difficult relational things that we experience. The second thing that we have to do, though, when we voice those things, when we do say, this is the moment where I'm going to stand up and I'm going to voice this thing, I'm going to say this hard thing, I'm going to treat my own experience with integrity. When we voice that experience, we have to voice our experience in the terms of some productive contribution to the shared goal. We have to find a way to speak about it that is, even if it's criticism, even if it's a hard thing, even if it's a complaint, we have to speak about it in a way that is sort of saying to everybody, but even as I say this hard thing, I'm still on the team. Even as I say this hard thing, I want us to achieve this goal. Even as I say this hard thing, I'm saying it so that we can get better at achieving the goal that we say we want to achieve. This is what Daniel does when he's speaking to the chief eunuch and the stewards of the chief eunuch in verses 12 and 13. He says this, he says, test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who ate the king's food be observed by you. Daniel is stating the experience that he's having. Hey, I'm not going to eat that food. But then he comes right along and says, you know what? If we ate different food, we would look even better. We'd be even healthier. And what you need in relationship to the king are healthy, young, fit, mentally and physically politicians. And if you do what I'm suggesting, we're actually all going to win in our pursuit of the goal together. Do you see what he's doing? He's not just showing up saying, hey, by the way, I hate this thing, and I'm going to light it on fire and burn it all down, which is a real temptation that we have when we've been hurt or we're in a frustrated work environment. It's a real temptation. Daniel probably would have felt those sorts of temptations because the Babylonians literally just burnt his home down. So he would have felt a bit of a temptation to want to burn it all down for them. And instead, he shows up and says, this isn't working for me, but you know what? It's actually not working for any of us. We would all be better if we maybe tried this other thing. We need to be able to do that. We need to be able to voice at our work environments negative or challenging experiences that we're having in a way that is contributing to the positive pursuit of the shared goal that we all have. And third thing, when we communicate about that, we need to communicate about it in a winsome manner. Notice the way that Daniel speaks to his superiors in this text, especially in 13. He says, then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you, and deal with your servants according to what you see. Daniel is showing up, even as he's shaping his experience and communicating his experience to his superiors in a way that is trying to name his negative experience and then couch it for them in the terms of a productive pursuit of a shared goal. He's doing those things, but he does that in a way where he's even being relationally wise in the way he communicates. Because he even goes to the stewards and is like, you know what, just let me test this out for 10 days and then you be the judge. Right? He's not showing up saying, I'm in the right here. I'm the person who knows. You should listen to me. He's like, this is what I'm seeing. I think it would be better if we did this. Can we just try it? But then you're the decision maker. You let us know what you see at the end of the day. And as he does that, he's speaking to his coworkers, not just coworkers, but people in authority over him in a way that is good for them in their work relationship. There's a little bit of a character that we're going to talk about in a second here of shrewdness, where Daniel is sort of stroking the ego a little bit of the people above him. We'll talk about that in a second. But there's also just an element of this here where he's inviting them as a team to perceive this new good thing together. Right? You'll see it, he says. You will see it. And when he does that, he's inviting people in relationally to be on a team as they fix this thing that's ruining their team dynamic. Put all together, these three things help us navigate our work by having courage and integrity with respect to our own experience at work, which is a very difficult thing to do. They help us to integrate our experience within and towards some positive development at our work and not against our work. And finally, they communicate in a wise way that grows relationships and allies. Daniel makes other people on his team that have common cause with him in this test. And then as a result, when the test works, the people are all the more desirous to say, wow, that worked. These three things together, voicing our experience with integrity, voicing our experience in the context of a productive contribution to the dynamics of a team, and doing so in a relationally wise and winsome way, are three elements that we need in order to navigate difficult work relationships. And these three elements put together, or maybe behind these three elements, is a particular quality that is present in them, especially in this environment. It's a quality that the Bible calls shrewdness. It's a super interesting quality. We kind of don't know what it means. Shrewdness is a particular kind of wisdom. You know, if I were to say you need to have wisdom at your work relationships, you'd be like, oh, yeah, okay, I kind of understand what that means. When I say you need to be shrewd in your work environments, that's kind of an interesting thing. Jesus speaks about shrewdness a couple of times in the Gospels, and he has some interesting things to say about being shrewd in certain environments. When he's about to send his disciples out to proclaim the good news, and in particular there's a consciousness of sending them out into the wildness and unpredictability of the world. Jesus says this in Matthew 10. He says, "Behold, I am sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves, so be wise as serpents." Some translations render that word wise there as shrewd as serpents, and innocent as doves. Interesting combination. Later, in probably Jesus' most confusing and maybe seemingly ethically problematic parable, the parable that's told in Luke chapter 16. I don't have time to go into the whole thing today, but should preach on it sometime. You should read it, Luke chapter 16, 1 to 8. You're like, Jesus, what are you teaching here? This is what he says at the end of this parable. He says, the master commended the dishonest manager. The hero of this parable is a dishonest manager. For his shrewdness. For the sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. Go ahead and leave this up for a second. What is Jesus commending here? If wisdom is about how to generally navigate the realities of this world well, wisdom is this strange, hard to define quality or character trait where we learn how to navigate this reality well. Shrewdness is a particular kind of wisdom that is about trying to navigate explicitly sinful or maybe even morally ambiguous contexts well. In other words, shrewdness is a focusing of wisdom for particularly complicated or morally ambiguous contexts. Shrewdness is not deception. It's not covetousness. It's not greed. It's not envy. It's not stepping on other people's faces in order to get what I want. I have a friend who, when we were in college, would say, if I have to step on somebody's face to get on Broadway. He had the courage to say it out loud. You know. Shrewdness is none of these things. Shrewdness is not trashing other people to help me advance. It's not dominating people at work. It's not winning and climbing the corporate ladder. Shrewdness is none of that. Jesus says to be wise as serpent, but also innocent as doves. It's not taking on immoral, deceptive, competitive behavior at my work to be shrewd. The Bible tells me to be shrewd, cool. And now I advance in my work, wonderful. Shrewdness is, however, and it feels weird at times that the Bible commends this, crafty wisdom to improve one's situation through maybe even at times sly conduct. Sly is about as far as I would stretch the word. And two, improve everyone's position along the way. An example maybe of a situation where we would need shrewd conduct is maybe a situation at work where, say, your boss or your supervisor is ruining your life. Maybe one of the major sorts of conflicts or situations that we experience in our work environments. And there are a couple different perspectives that we could take as we try to navigate this. One perspective is the pious perspective, which says, I was made to suffer, and so I'll suffer at work, and I will let my boss be terrible to me, and I will show everyone that being a Christian means having the strength to suffer. And look, there is a time and a situation where that is true. We're not looking at that today. There's a time and situation where, yes, we are called to suffer, we all are called to endure, but some of us, especially those of us who have grown up in religious contexts, can just jump to this perspective really quickly. And we don't think at all about biblical wisdom, about being shrewd or crafty as we navigate a sinful world. We just say, you know what? This is my lot. My boss is treating me terribly. I'm just supposed to take it. And so we become a punching bag for our emotionally unaccountable or abusive or toxic supervisor. A second perspective that we could have is maybe a vindictive perspective, where we go, it's dog eat dog out here, and I'm going to get my boss fired. And we, make our boss look bad, or maybe do things that are intentionally deceitful, or plant seeds with their boss in some unhelpful way, or, we don't set up the store the way that we should because it'll kind of look bad. No, we don't care. It doesn't reflect badly on me. It reflects badly on my manager. And we have some angry, vindictive perspective that is like, I'm going to treat you in the place that I'm in the same way that you are treating me. Maybe some of you lean towards the angry and vindictive perspective, which, if you're being treated poorly by your boss, that's a reasonable, understandable thought or emotional reaction to have. The third perspective that you could have is what we might call the shrewd perspective. You might think something like, I bet my supervisor is terrible to me because their supervisor is terrible to them. Their supervisor is putting them under some incredible pressure. They probably live and work in fear. They probably, if I were in their inner circle of friends, they would probably say something like, my boss is terrible to me and I live and work in fear, and then the people who are underneath me are trying to make my life incredibly additionally difficult. Right? We might, if we were looking at this, we might have some wisdom to think a bit about their situation. And in response to that, we might go, you know what? I'm going to propose and work towards this change or improvement to my supervisor, and when it works, I'm going to make sure that they get the credit for it in front of their supervisor, thus improving my situation by improving their situation and helping everybody change positively. Yeah. And it's shrewd because you're thinking about yourself. Sure, you are. You're thinking about improving your situation. But you do so in a wise and crafty way that actually improves everybody's situation along the way. Daniel's plan here about the tests with the vegetables and we're all going to look better and healthier, it's not just wise, it's shrewd. Because who gets the win for that plan when all the young politicians stand before the king? The chief eunuch does. Right? He made his boss look good by doing something that was about acting on a conviction that he had. These are the things that we need. The ability to voice our own experience and have integrity in response to that experience, to do so in a productive, on-the-team kind of a way, and in a way that is relationally wise and wins allies to our cause at work. Of course, it's incredibly difficult to do these things because there are high costs associated with acting in this way at work. The major risk... Oh, man. I've known that sneeze is coming for a while. And when you're trying to preach with the knowledge of a sneeze in the back of your mind, it's a difficult thing. The major risk for doing anything at your work that could be perceived in any way as stepping out of line, as offending someone, as rebelling against the power structure that exists at your work, is that oftentimes there's no plan B. And if it fails, or if it's interpreted poorly, or if someone responds in a punitive way, the cost could be high. There's no plan B for Daniel here. Really, at the end of the day, in terms of the worldly dynamics of things, Daniel's exile has turned out pretty well for him. I mean, to go through everything that they went through, and to be now exiled into this new society, and to have been ushered into this one-of-a-kind Babylonian politician prep program. There's no second school for him to go to. There's no second chance. There's no other career path. It's, get fired from this career path. And if you're not, corporately punished for what you did wrong, you're certainly, tossed into the gutter. And at that time, even, it wouldn't have even been sure that he could have, leaned back on his own community at that point. I mean, they're in such disarray, and I mean, as Daniel's own community is trying to make it as this fledgling exiled community in Babylon, who knows if it would even be wise for them to take on someone who has now been perceived as an enemy of the Babylonian state. I mean, the stakes here are so high, and even for those of us who are working in Manhattan, which you have high-powered jobs, the stakes are high, there seem like there are not many other options if things go wrong. Daniel's road was narrower. It honestly was. You have some challenges in your job that are unique, like the stresses, have you seen Australia's right to disconnect bill, right? I mean, that's a thing that exists in the world today because you're so bombarded by your work that another developed Western nation has to introduce legislation where you can be free to not look at your phone. I mean, it's insane what's happening in the world. And these dynamics are in a pressure cooker in Manhattan. And yet, there were elements of Daniel's situation where the road was even narrower. And the cost is very, very, very high for him in this situation. There's no plan B. In the background of this, then, is the reality for Daniel that this course of action is so costly because he doesn't know if anybody's looking out for him. And really, at the end of the day, this is one of the major dynamics that shape our work environments. It's one thing to work in a difficult context. It's another thing to work in a difficult context when you know you have an ally in your corner, right? When someone who's looking out for you at work, who interprets you charitably, who sees the hard work that you do, who wants to see you do well. And Daniel is in an environment where he has no reason to believe that he has an advocate or an environment here. An advocate in this environment. This is the same thing, of course, that's present for all of Daniel's supervisors. Do the stewards know that they have an advocate? Does the head eunuch know that he has an advocate? No. The road here is very narrow for all of the people in this work environment. And as a result, no one is able to act with some sort of courage or confidence that I have someone looking out for me in this work environment. And as a result, generally, in this environment that Daniel's in, people didn't speak up. Everyone kept their head down. Everyone tried to keep people happy. People didn't tell the truth. They lied in order to keep people happy. So there's no truth in this environment of any kind. This is what people are doing. And this is maybe what you are doing at your work. You're keeping your head down because there's really no sense that you have an ally in your corner or an advocate on your behalf. And why would you? The world is not built to give us advocates in these environments. The world is built to reward people who are making the boss happy. The world is built to reward people who look like they did the next best thing. And so we're all just trying to step on each other's face and jump over one another and do all these things. But there's no sense that you would have in your work, or Daniel in his work, that there is some sort of advocate looking out for you. And so we don't share honestly about our experience. We don't have the courage to propose anything different because what if it got misinterpreted? What if someone felt criticized? And so we keep quiet about those things, and we don't try to communicate winsomely to other people, if at all. Because why would we? We're just nice. We're like, what can I do to stay off your radar in terms of who's making trouble? And we just do that over and over and over again. And do you see the problem here? Like a work environment that's full of people who are working that way are just going to keep recycling the same destructive elements of our work environment, right? It's like even, say there are people who are creating those elements, fine, but once we all just start going along with them because we're afraid of what will happen to us, well, let's just be honest. We're part of the problem now. We're just all swimming in the ecosystem together because no one wants to face the fear of getting removed from that ecosystem. And of course, it's a major fear that we would have if we don't know that someone is looking out for us. And as a result, we have terrible ongoing work relationships. Now, maybe we end the sermon there. That would be depressing. Everything I just said, of course, somehow Daniel doesn't do that. Right? Daniel doesn't continue to recycle those elements of his work environment. Daniel speaks up, as we saw. Daniel does something else. Where does Daniel get the sense that he should speak up about this? Where does he get the power to do that? Where does he get the courage to do that? Where does he even get the courage to, in a sense, advocate for his bosses before the king in the form of a better plan for producing these politicians? Where does Daniel get the sense that I should do something that would bless and benefit you? Where does he get any of the courage to be able to do that? Where does Daniel get the power to speak up and advocate himself for something different when he doesn't have any guarantee that someone's advocating for him? This is what the text says in Daniel chapter 1, verse 9. God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. Daniel is able to speak up about something when he maybe is full of fear or when there's no guarantee that it's going to go well, because he has some strange sense that God is with him and advocating for him at his work. Daniel believes, and in this weird way, God gave favor. Did Daniel sense that? Did he know that? Where did he get the sense that if he talked to this specific, the text doesn't really say. The text just says that Daniel spoke to someone and that God gave him favor over that conversation. Daniel had some inbuilt sense that even if there's no one in the flesh who's necessarily advocating for me or is my ally in this place, that I have a greater ally who is here with me at my work. And Daniel's sense, wherever he got it from, that God was advocating for him on his behalf with the chief eunuch, gave him the courage to be able to speak up about something that no one else in his work environment would have spoken up about. God advocated for Daniel. And one of the major things that Jesus does in this moment in time right now is advocate for you. In fact, we could maybe almost say that Jesus died to advocate for you. It's one of the major things that Jesus is doing right now is advocating for you on your behalf. This is what 1 John chapter 2, verses 1 to 2 says. My little children, I am writing these things to you so that you may not sin. But if anybody does sin, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ, the righteous one. He is the propitiation or the sacrifice for our sins, and not only for ours, but also for the sins of the whole world. I love this text. Leave it up for a second. My little children, to you, I'm writing to you these things so that you don't sin. He's like, I'm trying to give you these things so that you don't get it wrong, so that you don't sin, so that you don't make mistakes. We could imagine a work handbook version of this passage. He's writing to people a code of conduct so that they get it right in the Christian life. And yet, right off the back of that exhortation, he says, but if anybody does mess up, if anybody does sin, if anybody does make a mistake, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ, the righteous one. This makes all the difference in our lives generally, but in our work specifically. Because so much about our work, the reason why it's hard, the reason why we can't speak up, the reason why everyone is living and working in fear is because we just don't feel like we can mess up. We can't make any mistakes. We can't make anyone happy. We can't ever get something wrong. But you could get something wrong if you knew you had an advocate. And if you have an advocate who is standing before the throne of God advocating for you, then that man is certainly qualified and able to advocate for you at your work. He's able. if he has permission to stand and plead your case before the guy who runs the whole show, then he is able and powerful in the right way and the right time to advocate for you in your toxic work environment and in front of your power-hungry boss. He's able to. If Jesus is able to advocate for you before God, he's able to advocate for you at your work. Jesus died in part to be able to advocate for you. And when you believe that Jesus is your advocate, we believe all sorts of things about Jesus. Maybe you believe he's your Savior. Maybe you believe he's your friend. I told you he was your friend last week, so I'm really hoping you believe it now. We believe all these things. But sometimes our faith is just missing key components to it. Or we have certain aspects of our faith that we have not brought it into specific dialogue with some area of our life that we need to get clearer about our faith in that area. And some of us have never believed that Jesus is my advocate. That when I make mistakes, when I'm in an ambiguous situation, when I am a sheep amongst wolves of power-hungry people or people who are oppressed by their bosses in a capricious and random situation, that in that situation, Jesus Christ advocates for me. You need to believe that. Because that is power to you to be able to live in your work environment the way that Daniel lived in his. Daniel believed that God advocated for him with the chief eunuch at his work. And you should believe that Jesus is able to advocate for you in the specificity of your work and your job. Believe in God at work. At work. Believe in him there. In that place. In your work. In your tasks. In your relationships. Believe that Jesus advocates for you there, and you will have the power and ability to change your work relationships. Look at the fruits in Daniel chapter 1, 17 to 20 of this belief that Daniel had. In verses 17 to 20, we see a number of things. First of all, Daniel made all his coworkers look good. They went in front of the king. Verse 19, the king spoke with them, and among all of them none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Not only was the presentation of all these young Babylonian politicians a success, but there were a particular few that stood out. And all of that reflects well on the people who are running this program. Daniel made his coworkers look good. Second, they did a good job at their jobs, and they were noticed for it. This whole thing was a success. And of course, that's in the background of our work. We need to do well at our work, right? We shouldn't stop caring about doing well at our work. We should want to do well at our work. We should just believe that when Jesus is advocating for us, we will do a better job at our work, and the whole of our work will do better and get better. And of course, in these ways, Daniel and his friends, they witnessed to the God of the Bible. And over the course of the book, Daniel won people to faith in the God of the Bible by believing in God at his work. And then as people saw him work differently in ways that were integrated with his belief, they saw his God as a result. All of these things were simply fruits of Daniel believing that God was with him at his work. And you should believe in the same ways that God is with you at your work. Some of us honestly need to repent of not believing that God was with us at our work. Some of us, we walk into the doors at our work and just functionally, it's like our faith isn't real anymore. If we were really honest, we would stand before God and say, God, I kind of believe you in this. I definitely believe you with the whole eternal salvation thing. Great, fine. I kind of believe you in my marriage. I'm sort of hoping that a marriage built on Jesus will be better. Okay, I kind of believe in you there. I kind of believe in you, whatever. But really, honestly, I just really don't believe that you make any difference at my work. I don't believe that you have authority in that place. I don't believe that you care about the work that I'm doing. I don't believe that in the little nitty-gritty of my work, you actually are able to make things go one way or another way. And if you believe that in your work, that is actually something that we need to go before God and say, God, I am sorry that I thought that your authority stopped at the doorway of my workplace. I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry that I thought that my bosses are more authoritative than you. I actually functionally think that. I don't just want to change that belief. I want to first be sorry that I believed that in the first place. And then to come back after repenting of that and saying, and I believe now today instead that Jesus, you are authoritative over my work and that you advocate for me at my work. We need to believe that together today, because if Jesus is able to advocate for you in front of the holy God, the maker of heaven and earth, he's able to advocate for you at your work, and he wants to advocate for you at your work. Would you believe God in that today and actually just give him an opportunity to advocate for you? Like when we don't believe God in that place, we don't even give him a shot. We're just doing all the work stuff and navigating the culture in our own effort. But if we're able to stop that for just a second, Jesus gives us an invitation to say, will you watch what I'm able to do as I advocate for you in your place of work, in that challenging environment? Let me show you what my advocacy for you looks like. And when we do that, we have strength at work to do our work relationships differently, to bless our work environment with not just work that is better and is done better, but a better working environment for all people. And we get to show people as we act differently in our work, the God who gives us power to act like other people are not able to in that environment. Amen.